They belong to each other. They are serving together because of the grace of God. Let me just remind you that you are, as it were, the recipients of grace. No matter what the scoreboard reads. There was one man's particular testimony you've more than likely heard. I've certainly shared bits and pieces of it, who would become indivisibly linked with the words grace. Amazing grace. John Newton, who was raised in a Christian home in England during his early years, but he was orphaned at the age of 6 and lived with non-believing relatives who took great pleasure in mocking Christianity, persecuting this little boy for following the faith of primarily his mother. At last, he was old enough in his early teens to escape the horrible conditions of his foster home, and he ran away. He made it to the British Navy Yard and became an apprentice seaman in the British Navy. He served in the Navy for some time, and his now growing rebellion, his hatred for God, his wicked lifestyle just kind of caught up with him. His drunkenness got him into trouble again and again, so he ran. He deserted the British Navy. He escaped with a slave trader heading to Africa. In his own biographical notations, he made it clear why he ran away to Africa. He wrote, "I went so that I could sin my fill." He eventually joined a Portuguese slave trader and was promised great riches in this horrible enterprise. But he ended up being treated almost as cruelly himself. He was forced to work on this man's plantation and eat his food, he wrote, quote, "from the dusty floor like a dog." So he ran away again. He made it to the coast where he lit a signal fire. A ship was nearby heading home to England. Picked him up. The captain of the ship was disappointed at first that he didn't have any ivory in his possession to sell him. But because he knew something of navigation, he was made a ship's mate. It didn't last long. Thanks to Newton's drunken behavior, he broke into the ship's supply of rum and distributed to the entire crew. They all got drunk. He fell overboard and nearly drowned. They pulled him back. Toward the end of that voyage near Scotland, Newton's ship encountered heavy winds. It was blown off course. It began to take on water. Newton was sent down into the hold to man those manual pumps. And he was terrified. This was the worst place to be among all the crew, and he was down there alone. And he worked those pumps literally for several days without sleeping. And as he worked, he came under deep conviction of where his life was going and his hopelessness before God. And he remembered the gospel that he'd heard as a little boy. In fact, he says he recalled memory verses that he'd been taught as a little boy. And down there below deck, he cried out to God and was transformed by the grace of God. He would eventually enter the ministry and become a powerful pastor-teacher in England, well known because of his testimony that exemplified the grace of God. But more than anything, because of a poem he composed to serve as an illustration for his New Year's sermon, January 3rd, 1977. Amazing grace. You want to say it with me? How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. The truth is, we are all indivisibly linked to the grace of God. All of us have been redeemed. We're lost and spiritually blind. We were found by Christ, and we found in Him our spiritual sight. Now, Paul does something else here. He not only opens with a variation of the typical Gentile